You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
3, 2, 1.
We are gathered here as advisors, as scientists.
The kind of place we expect a ghost to like to wander around.
Hey, we all know that we're going down, baby.
I'll help you. I'm something of a witch.
Welcome to Mission Spooky. I'm your fantastic host, JC. With me today, as per usual, the queen of everything herself, Kiki, and our local cryptid enthusiast, Cord. How you guys doing?
We're good, except you also forgot somebody else is here today.
Crud!
We are here with, he told me I had to call him King Scott Randolph. He is the operator and tour guide for Ghost Tours of New Hope, Pennsylvania. And I'm so excited to have Scott on today because New Hope is one of my absolute favorite little villages of Pennsylvania, and it is so haunted. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on today and talk with us.
I am really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, first of all, tell us about how the ghost tour got started, because I know it has a lot to do with my personal history growing up. But I know it was started by one of my favorite people. So go ahead, tell us all about it.
The tour was started by best-selling author Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries, and she actually was from New York. She moved to Philadelphia. She loved history, especially when it came to the founding of this country. So she loved the American Revolution and that whole the history revolving around it. So she was writing about historical events, and then a woman reached out to her and told her how she lived in Washington's Crossing and how she was seeing troops marching by outside her window at night and then disappear in the woods. Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries thought she was nuts. She didn't believe in any of this paranormal stuff. She thought it was ridiculous. And she very politely said to the woman, well, thank you very much for calling me, and, have a very nice evening. She also started writing about historical buildings. And one of the very haunted buildings in Bucks County is Bolton Mansion in Levittown. And let's say she wrote an article about that. She'd put in there a little blurb like how maybe somebody saw a ghost. And she did it for the fun of it because, like I said, she didn't believe in this. She thought that if you had an experience, you were probably nuts. But people started writing to her saying, Mrs. Jeffrey, when I was in the Bolton Mansion, here's my paranormal experience. Then she went on vacation to Scotland. And when she was on vacation in Scotland, she couldn't find a room. And she finally found this inn very late at night who gave her a storage room with a cot. And she was so desperate, she said, I'll take it. She was woken to this feeling that somebody entered her room, and that she could hear them open the door, stand at the foot of her bed, breathing. She flips on the flashlight, looks around. The door is still closed and locked, and nobody's in the room. She then tries to go to sleep, and then she's woken up to the sound of this Scottish band playing bagpipes and all of that. She gets up, she looks out the window. She can see them march by her window into the woods and disappear, almost identical to what was told to her about this woman in Washington's Crossing. That was the night that she believed in the paranormal. And then she also had a friend who was a medical doctor, who told her how she had a paranormal experience. So she then decided there's something to this, and she needed to start investigating because her own experience told her, her own senses told her there's something going on. She actually did call that woman in Washington's Crossing and apologized to her, and then went ahead and investigated. So she was doing investigations. And I say this on the tour. I've been doing this recently because I only thought of it recently. But she started doing ghost investigations before there was even television in the American home. She was doing ghost investigation in the mid-1940s until her retirement in 1986. And she would travel all over the world, literally, to investigate ghosts. 1971, she writes a book called Ghosts in the Valley. In 72, she writes a sequel, More Ghosts in the Valley. 75 is when she wrote her New York Times #1 bestseller. And by the late 70s, people started saying to her, we love your writings. We wish we could see some of these places you write about. That was the seed that was planted in her head about maybe she should do something. She didn't know what. And then she read there was a romance novel tour that was run by Barbara Cartland, who holds the Guinness Book of World Records for writing romance novels. By the way, she's also the step-grandmother to Princess Diana. So she reads about this, and she goes to London to do Barbara Cartland's romance novel tours. She goes with her daughter, Linda, and this poor tour guide got a barrage of business questions from Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries. And then she, on the same trip, her and her daughter do the Jack the Ripper tour, and this tour guide also got a barrage of questions. By the way, if you talk to Linda, she will tell you it was the most embarrassing thing she ever has been through in her life with her mother, because she had to sit there and watch these poor tour guides get, hammered with all these business questions. What kind of insurance do you have, and do you go in the buildings or whatever, and all this stuff. And she went there, and that's when she knew. She knew before she went to London that this was what she wanted to do. She came back, and in 1981, she began the ghost tours of New Hope. And so for 41 years, we've been doing this, and we model it after the way she modeled it. And our slogan that we use today, that was started by her 41 years ago, you get the mystery and the history of New Hope.
It's a good slogan.
That's great. Yeah.
One of the reasons that I appreciate that kind of ghost tour, because I'm the history buff. I'm the one that does all the history research. So, and of course, as I've told the listeners a million times, the first book that I ever read as a child is Adi-Kent's book. So it's all her fault that I'm doing.
Yeah, right.
Good job.
Well, she was really an inspiration, and she was a pioneer, because when she was writing and doing all of that, it was not acceptable for women to be doing the kinds of things that she was doing, and she had an unusual name. Most of these male chauvinist editors assumed that these writings by Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries, it was a man. And one of my favorite stories is when she was doing one of her books, I presume, by the way, that was Bermuda Triangle, because that was the New York Times #1 bestseller. She went on a TV show to be interviewed, and she goes onto the stage and she meets the host, and the guy says, "Hi, how are you?" And she said, "How do you do? I'm Adi-Kent." And he said, "Where's your partner, Thomas Jeffries?" And she goes, "Oh no, honey, I'm the whole shebang." So she really was one of a kind. She was beautiful. She was a Vera Maxwell model. That's how she paid her way through college. She appeared on magazines like Mademoiselle and Vogue.
Yep.
And so here she was, this beautiful woman, and she would go into buildings that most sane people would never go in because they were afraid, and she had no fear.
Her picture is on I want to say it was on the back cover of the book, or like the inside cover, and she had a skirt on, really pretty blouse, beautiful hair up, done all nice, high heel shoes. That was my impression of what a ghost chaser should look like.
Yeah.
Ever since I was a kid. It's like, no, if she can do it in high heels looking that good, then that is what we need to do. So
if you were to look into the dictionary, or I guess no one looks into the dictionary anymore, but if you Google on, the definition of elegant, her picture comes up.
yes.
She was elegant.
Well,
Yes.
you know what that means, JC. Get those heels out, baby.
Yeah, you're gonna have to work it harder, guys. I'm a
Yeah.
little disappointed. No coiffed hair.
Well, not on the scene yet. Maybe soon. I can quaff. I just usually choose not to.
Oh, you know what? I take that back about Cord. You do have really good hair. I forgot. You got the pompadour thing going on.
Yeah, I got the
I
pump,
take
baby.
that back.
I got that greasy hair, baby.
Yes. So, can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the locations that you guys do on the tour?
Sure. But I do want to make a comment you said about like how you do the history. And the thing
Yes.
that I love about the fact that when we say the mystery and the history, which is what Adi-Kent set up, there are a lot of Continental soldiers who are seen in New Hope. And if I said to you, oh, there's a Continental soldier that you see walking down the street, you'll be, oh, that's nice. But if I don't tell you the history as to why there were Continental soldiers there and give you the context, to me, it doesn't have the same impact. I like the history part because it gives a foundation to the paranormal. And so, did I mention the Logan Inn? Because there's a lot of Continental soldiers in the Logan Inn. The Logan Inn is probably our bedrock or our focus. It's kind of in the center of town. A few years ago, the Food Network said that the Logan Inn is the most haunted inn in the world that serves food and spirits, pun intended.
Nice.
I have said jokingly, but it's not really a joke, that our tour is 1 hour. I could probably do the entire hour just at the Logan Inn. There are so many stories. There is a room there that they call the Haunted Room, which is no one's supposed to know, but it's room 6. You can go on their website, read all about room 6, by the way. So, but the funny thing is, people think, stay away from room 6 because it's haunted. I hate to break it to you, the whole building is haunted. You're not going to get away from, paranormal activity by, staying away from room 6. Things happen on every single floor. Things have happened in every single room. And they just did renovation. They reopened after spending lots of money. They reopened in April of 2021, and there's still paranormal activity going on, which, it's a hot spot. But it's not the only one. We have a couple other really big hotspots that are on the tour. The other one that I have to mention is actually it's kind of a dual location. It's a bed and breakfast that's owned and operated by Carl and Nadine Glassman, and that would be the Wedgwood Inn, and they also own the Umpleby. Those two buildings are also very haunted. I know people said that the Logan Inn is the most haunted in the world or in New Hope. I tell you what, Wedgwood Inn is if it's not number 2, I don't know if it has more than the Logan Inn. I tell you what, it's a real close second. It's a really close second. And the same thing, Wedgwood Inn, they have a book that guests sign. And to this day, as up until just this past weekend, guests write in there that they had some kind of paranormal activity going on at the Wedgwood Inn. And that's one of our stops. We have 2 routes to the ghost tours of New Hope. We have Mechanic Street and Ferry Street, and Wedgwood Inn is part of the Ferry Street route, along with the Umpleby. They share the same parking lot, those 2 bed and breakfasts. And they're both old. Most of the buildings in New Hope, by the way, they are built in the 19th century, so 1800s. You have a few buildings like the Logan Inn and the Van Zandt House. Those are 1700s. So you have a couple buildings in there that are from the 18th century, but the bulk of the buildings there are 19th century.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Is the Van Zandt house, is that related to the Van Zandts from Van Zandt Bridge?
Most likely the Van Zandts were very prominent in Bucks County. If you're familiar with Craven Hall in Warminster, Bucks County, Craven Hall used to be a Van Zandt house as well, and there are Van Zandts buried at the Craven Hall Cemetery. I can't tell you with 100% certainty, but I would imagine that they're related somehow, whether it's direct or indirect. But the Van Zandts were very prominent in Bucks County. So, yeah.
I did not know that Craven Hall was owned by the Van Zandts. My grandmother was doing also paranormal investigations in the 70s and 80s, and one of the first places that they investigated was Craven Hall.
Wow. Yeah.
And I've been trying to get us in there. I thought it would be fun to go back and do Craven Hall since my grandmother had done it with her investigative team a bajillion years ago. Yeah. That's too funny. I legit just was trying to get in touch with them yesterday. So weird. I'm sorry. So you were saying most of the buildings were built what year-ish?
Most of the buildings are 19th century, so 1800s.
Gotcha.
Like I said, there was a few exceptions that are built in the 1700s. Van Zandt House, which is right at the corner of Mechanic and Main, 1 block over from the Logan Inn, which is also a 1727 to be exact. Across the street from the Logan Inn is the Benjamin Perry Mansion, which is also the home to the New Hope Historical Society. That home was built in 1784 by coincidentally Benjamin Perry. So you do have your 1700 buildings that are still standing in New Hope. Like I said, most of the buildings, like the Wedgwood Inn, the foundation is actually 18th century, but the building that you see was built later in the early 1800s. Same thing with the Umpleby. So you'll find a few buildings that use the foundation from a building that was previously there.
What is your favorite haunted location in New Hope? What, do you have a favorite, or is it just kind of you like the whole thing?
I do have my favorite story, and that would be the hitchhiker story. It is probably our most famous ghost. I can tell you after this, there's a ghost that's actually seen more than the famous ghost, and people pay attention to this one now because of Hamilton. But the ghost that has been seen, and we could talk about that, after I talk about the most famous. But Aaron Burr has been seen in New Hope more than anybody else.
Oh wow!
Our most famous ghost is the hitchhiker, and it is my favorite story because it's another story that I probably could do in an hour. And the reason is because I can tell in such great detail how this apparition has been seen year after year after year. Now, I will tell you, though, we have not had any reports of him being seen since the pandemic. But to me, it's just a matter of time before we find that somebody just saw him again. But the hitchhiker story, it actually starts in 1971. And it was 2 girls who were from Lambertville, New Jersey. For people who are not familiar with the area, New Hope actually sits on the Delaware River. And right across the river in New Jersey is Lambertville. and they're called the Twin Villages on the Delaware River because they're right across a bridge. And so these two girls were from Lambertville, and they go into Bucks County, into Dublin, and they go to a party, and it's late at night. And on the way home, they see a hitchhiker in Dublin, Bucks County, and they just left a party. They're having a good time. They're laughing. They roll down the window, and they yell some kind of smart remark, get a car, or too bad it's cold for you, we're warm in here, whatever they were saying, some kind of taunting thing. And they continue driving into Doylestown, which is the county seat of Bucks County. And when they get to Main Street, there he is again. Mm-hmm. And what identified him was he has really blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, brown jacket, brown pants, knapsack on the back. And so they're puzzling. How it can't be the same guy. Yeah, how many weirdos are out there with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes and dressed the same? So they're trying to figure it out. And by the time they get to New Hope for the bridge going over the canal on Bridge Street, they see him for the third time that night. But they actually had enough courage this time to stop the car, roll down the window, and ask him, do you need a ride? And then he vanishes in front of their eyes. That's one of my favorite stories because he's been seen all throughout Bucks County and in New Jersey by the same girls, by the way. He was seen in Flemington, New Jersey. Our last sighting of him was in 2019, and he was seen on River Road, which is also Main Street, New Hope, on River Road just outside of Washington's Crossing, maybe 2 miles from the visitor center at Washington's Crossing, which is about 7-8 miles from New Hope south. And that was the last sighting of him. A guy that worked in Peddler's Village. He worked at the Cock and Bull restaurant, one of our most famous restaurants in Bucks County. He was doing a performance there. They used to do mystery theater, and he was driving home, and he sees this boy. And he said what struck him funny was it was a hot, humid night in July, and this kid was wearing a brown winter coat. And probably one of the most famous sightings was by Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries herself. Saw him one night driving home from New Hope on Windy Bush Road, which is also 232. 232 goes right through New Hope and into Philadelphia. And she saw him one night driving home into Southampton where she lived. And she said she didn't think about it at the moment. She thought about it later. All of the kids in 1981, these kids were wearing blue jeans, but this boy was dressed in all brown. So that's just a little bit of a sample, but there are a lot more stories that we have of how he's been sighted all over in the Bucks County area and around, not just in New Hope, but around New Hope and in that region.
Yeah, you said he's been seen in Flemington, New Jersey. That's a decent drive, right?
Yeah, and I think it was the same from the original story. It was the same two girls. It was actually a year later. So these girls see him in January in 71, and exactly 1 year later, they're driving in two separate cars in Flemington, New Jersey, and they see him again. And they don't have cell phones, so what they do is they start flashing their high beams back and forth at each other to acknowledge that they saw him again. A lot of the stories that we do, again, everything's based on what Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries did. But the hitchhiker story is actually in more Ghosts in the Valley. So you can go right to her book and see right out of the book that original story. And then it was part of the ghost tours right out of the gate in 1981. And we still do that story today. It's kind of a staple story that, you know, our guides are required to do it because it's become such a known, you know, apparition.
Do you want to hear my quick little story about a place that I just recently, as in right before we started recording, found out that Martine's has in fact moved to a different location? My story comes from, you said it was originally the ferry.
It was the toll house for the ferry boat, yeah.
Martine's used to be in that building, and most of the listeners know I used to cook ages ago. And the one place I used to work at was called the Carversville Inn. This is only important because Carversville is not that far from New Hope at all. And so we had a lot of our wait staff worked at many different locations. And most of those locations were in New Hope because they could, you know, if they didn't pick up a Saturday shift with us, then they went down to Martine's or a place called Mother's, which I think we established is no longer in business. So I trust them, because I worked with these people and none of them were too, like, as we say, that a lot of them were very skeptical. I will say Carversville Inn was not haunted. We never had any issues there. Very, very old building too. So it's not, as we always say, it could be old, but it doesn't necessarily have to be haunted. You know,
Right.
there could be nothing there at all. But at Martine's, what was interesting is that you would have some crossovers with these different wait staff, and they may not have seen each other for years, right? But they're meeting up again at Carversville, and we're sitting at the bar, and I'm listening to these stories, and they're realizing that they all had the same thing happen to them, which was really cool because they'd all worked at different times there. Apparently, there was a little alcove area where it would be like the point of sale where the computers would have been. It was always the feeling that someone was standing with you And on many occasions, they would be touched on the arm as if, like in the restaurant industry, sometimes we'll just, instead of saying behind, you'll just touch someone on their back so that they know, like, someone's coming through or someone has drinks or whatever. And that's what it felt like. They'd acknowledge it and then, turn around later and realize, like, no one is with me and no one is walking past me. And what the hell, Um, So I always thought those stories were great because, like I said, there were 3 or 4 different wait staff who worked with us who hadn't seen each other for years and hadn't really talked about it until that night when they're all just kind of trading the same issues. And then there was another time that someone who'd worked there for a long time, they'd been there like 5 or 6 years off and on, being a waiter. And he said, I swear to God, one night I was closing and I thought I heard someone call my name from across the room. And I, look, absolutely nobody's in the dining room at all. And then the chef comes out because they're closing up the back, and he's like, "Did you just call me?" I'm like, "No, man." You're like, we had our own stuff to do. So does that ring a bell with anything that's ever happened in that building?
Yeah, that building before it was a restaurant, and all that was actually the library. Then obviously it was the toll house and then the library. And one of the things about New Hope that's great is the consistency of some of the things that happen in the building. It seems to be a lot of the stories that we've heard in there is whatever the entity is likes to be mischievous, where they will come in the morning after everything was locked up the night before, and they can have the tables rearranged on them, all of the chairs, like you put them up for so you can sweep the floors, and all of a sudden all the chairs are scattered everywhere around the room. The bar area, same thing, the bottles will be rearranged and thrown all over. So that seems to be also typical. That's happening. It's now the Salt House. It was happening when it was Martine's, and it's happening now when it was the Salt House. Sometimes people speculate maybe it's the old librarian. Don't know for sure, but I do know it's, and I apologize, I'm not sure which of the books it's in, but those stories, the Martine stories that I was just saying, those are in one of the Ghost in the Valley books. There's a new book that came out that was published posthumously called The Haunted Village in Valley, and it actually completes the trilogy of Ghost in the Valley, more Ghost in the Valley, and the Haunted Village in Valley. The difference between Haunted Village and Valley is it's almost all New Hope. Not all of it, but it's most of the stories in that one is New Hope related. But I apologize, I don't know which book is the Martine stuff, but it is in there.
Of course, I would say go purchase all of them because they're all great.
Yeah, and what's nice too is a few years ago, it's you can get it as a paperback book if you want, but they also updated it. So if you have a Kindle or whatever electronic device you're using to read, you go right to Amazon and download it, and there you go, you have it.
Yes, like I said, I still have my original copy of the Ghost in the Valley from 71, and then I actually did purchase this last book through Kindle. So that worked out great.
Yeah, I'm kind of old school because the one thing about buying the paperback book, the battery won't run out on it.
Yeah.
So.
No, I get that. I prefer actual books over like the digital as well. I mean, if I knew how to read, I would prefer them.
Right. Yes.
Get the audiobook, Actually, that's it. I don't know if there is an audiobook for that, but that should be something we should look into.
Yes. That'd be awesome. Any personal stories you want to share? Like, have you had any personal things happen to you where you're like, what the heck?
You mean paranormal related or
Right, I know, I'm sorry I was kind of vague on that one.
Yeah,
You're like, that happens to me every day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it doesn't have to be paranormal for me to do that. So one of the things that people have typically asked, not always, but it is a common question to get: has anything ever happened on the tour? And actually, this statistic is from Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries. By the way, I am answering your question. It's just going around.
Oh, you're fine. I trust you.
Thank you. Hold on, I got to write that down. Someone actually trust me. Anyway, Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries said that when you take the tour, more than 10% of the people who take the tour will have a paranormal experience. I believe that statistic is actually higher now, and it's because of the technology we have with your phones. It is so easy now for people, and we encourage pictures and video and paranormal devices on the tour. And we have seen a lot more activity with people either capturing things that there's no explanation. Just had one just last week. I had one. Somebody took a picture right there in front of me, and I have no explanation for it. So we're seeing an increase in that. So people will say, has anything ever happened to me on the tour? And it's like, yes, I've had a paranormal experience on the tour. Then people will ask, has anything ever happened that the entire group experienced the paranormal event? And the answer to that question is yes. And it happened to me twice that I was doing the tour. I was standing in front of the Benjamin Perry Mansion, and we talk about that on the tour. And I was doing my normal talk about Benjamin Perry Mansion, built in 1784, blah, blah, blah. And somebody in the group, it was about 15 people, somebody in the group goes, "What in the world is that?" And you turn and you look on the second floor, left-hand side, everybody could clearly see, including myself, a woman dressed in colonial attire with a colonial cap on, holding a candle, walking right in front of the window. Now, this is like it's after 9 o'clock at night. It's dark. The building is empty and it's locked up tight. By the time I reached in my back pocket to grab my cell phone to pull it out so I could take a picture, she was gone. About 2 weeks later, my family went up there and we did the Benjamin Perry Mansion tour. They have a historic tour. It's really good. If you're in New Hope, I recommend it. It's a great history of the mansion, a little bit of New Hope too. We took that tour. In that room, under the window where I saw the woman, there is a dresser under the windowsill. It is impossible for anybody to walk in front of that window the way that I saw that night. And I asked the tour guide of the Benjamin Perry Mansion, I said, "How long has that dresser been there?" "Oh, about 100 years.
Nice.
1 year later, I'm doing another tour at the Benjamin Perry Mansion, and I'm talking about the Benjamin Perry Mansion, and I was going to talk about my personal experience when, what do you know, somebody in the group says, "Oh my God," and we turn and we look, and walking in front of the window, it was almost identical to what I saw the year before, the same looking woman with the cap and the candle walking right in front of the window. So that kind of answers the question. And by the way, that's the only time I've ever seen anything that I would say that I saw an apparition. It was those 2 times at the Benjamin Perry Mansion in that second window on the left.
Wow. So is there any idea of who that might be? Do they have any?
One of the things that Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries said when she did, like, if you came to her and said, "Hey, I got a ghost in my house, can you investigate?" She investigated like the investigative journalist that she was. And she would try to find out who that apparition was and why they were there and why they were lingering. She said that sometimes you were able to connect the dots and you were able to say, like in the case of the hitchhiker, she actually found out who that boy was. She knew exactly that this kid was killed in 1967 hitchhiking late at night in Bucks County. So she found him. Sometimes you have an apparition and you do not know who or why they're doing it. You just can't make the connection. With the Benjamin Perry Mansion, to say who it is exactly, I don't know if we could pinpoint it, simply because Benjamin Perry built the home in 1784 and his direct descendants lived there until 1966. And so, yeah, and they have their family tree when you take the tour. It's in the kitchen, the family tree of Benjamin Perry. A lot of people live there, from obviously his wife, his children, which were daughters, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. Which woman is that? Don't really know. But I would assume, I think it's a safe assumption, that it is one of Benjamin Perry's, if it's not his wife, then it's one of his, descendants.
So, besides Aaron Burr, is there any other famous ghosts? Because if you look at the list and listeners can actually just go to Wikipedia and you can go down the list and see all the quote notable people who've had some kind of connection with New Hope, and there's quite a few.
It is a beautiful town.
It's
yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
gorgeous. I think my 2 favorite times of year are the spring, when everything is just popping out, and of course the fall for the ghosts.
Yeah.
But is there anybody else that's like, lingering that other people have seen besides Aaron?
Well, Aaron Burr is probably the most famous because he was the vice president of the United States. Joseph Pickett, who was a resident of New Hope. He was born in 1848. He's buried in New Hope. He passed away early 1900s. He's been seen a lot. Adele Gamble, who owns the Ghost Tours of New Hope, she will tell you that Joseph Pickett is her favorite ghost because he's appeared to her on numerous occasions, and a couple times while she actually was doing the tour. There was another time when people actually on the tour got to see an apparition.
And Joseph Pickett is a folk artist from our area. And for the
Yeah.
listeners who don't know, he's got some, I love that style of art. So I would suggest if you go on Google Joseph Pickett artist, and it's going to come up. He's got some really cool things. So
Yeah, and I guess it's typical of a lot of artists when they're alive. People just don't appreciate what they're doing. I also think his style, because it was considered primitive style, I guess a lot of people didn't understand it or appreciate it. But the funny thing is, his most famous painting, he painted in 1911 at the back of the Wedgwood Inn, which we talked about earlier. There's a gazebo in the back. It's not the original gazebo, but it is where the original gazebo sat. So you can go right to where Joseph Pickett painted Manchester Valley. He should have called it the New Hope Valley because it's a great painting of New Hope. You see the schoolhouse, the New Hope Ivy Lane Railroad, the Aquatuck Creek, and the homes. And nobody liked that painting when he was alive, and nobody really liked the painting when he was gone either. But that painting sits now in the New York Museum of Modern Art. And if you're going to Google, you can Google Joseph Pickett and paintings, but Google Manchester Valley and it will come up. And last time I Googled it, it actually came up. Somebody took a picture of it on display in the museum. So I guess he got the last laugh because, his,
Right.
How many artists get to say their painting is in the, New York Museum of Modern Art, So finally people appreciated what he did and like that style. And finally people appreciated that style. It's a great painting of New Hope. It's wonderful.
There's also the Playhouse right there that used to be the mill.
The mill itself, it's historic for a couple of reasons. And it goes back to Benjamin Perry. When Benjamin Perry was in New Hope, he was very prominent. He was a very wealthy man. He owned many mills in the region, not just in New Hope, but he owned mills in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. And his main mill, the main mill in 1790, burnt down and burnt to the ground. And people went to him and they wanted to know, what is he going to do? And he said, I'm going to build a brand new mill. And this new mill is going to bring new hope to this village. And that's when the town became known as New Hope. But he actually built several new mills at that time. Some were in New Jersey and some in Pennsylvania. They were all called the New Hope Mills. But he rebuilt his main mill. And when he rebuilt the main mill, today it is the Bucks County Playhouse. So that new main mill that brought new hope to the village in the 1930s became a theater. And so many famous people have been through there. To this day, they do wonderful performances there with famous people that come through. And some people who started their career there. There is a new restaurant and hotel right next to it called the Ghost Light. And that is what they used to do in the theater to ward off ghosts and spirits to protect the theater when it was empty. They would put on the stage a lit lantern, and that's where the name the Ghost Light came from. There was a famous actor, I can't recall the guy's name, but he typically played bad guys, but he was a very distraught, disturbed actor who tried to commit suicide in New York and failed, and he ended up permanently scarring his face, which is why he ended up getting a lot of roles after he recovered and got his life back in order. He played a lot of bad guy roles because he had that look, and if you watched any shows, especially in the mid to late 70s, you saw him, I think he was in the Rockford Files and the original Charlie Angels and all of that, but he performed at the Bucks County Playhouse. And one of the stories is said that sometimes when actors are getting ready, you hear this blood curdling scream that happens throughout the theater. Some people have said it was that guy. Whether that's true or not, I don't know who the apparition is, where the scream is coming from. People said it was him because he performed there and he was tormented. It has such a history there, and people can't. Again, we're going back to what Adi-Kent said. You can't always identify. Because, it's been an operating theater since the 1930s, but it was an operating mill, since the late 1700s.
Right.
So, is that scream from a tormented actor, or was the scream from something that happened when it was a mill? I can't tell you for sure where, I don't know anyone can tell you where it's actually coming from or why.
We got a little bit into that. We did a whole episode on haunted theaters, and we did talk about the history of the Ghost Light and one theater in particular. I think in this case we got into it, the history behind it. I did all the research. I think they were kind of trying to make it haunted when nothing was really going on, which goes back to the whole either sometimes it's old, it doesn't necessarily have to be haunted, and then sometimes it's haunted and you just don't know who the person is.
Just because something is old, there may or may not be paranormal activity. But if something is new, doesn't mean that there's not paranormal activity either.
Right.
You could buy a brand new house and have paranormal activity. One of my favorite lines for one of my favorite ghost movies is, you moved the headstones, but you didn't move the bodies. So,
oh yeah,
Poltergeist, for those who are wondering, the original.
They better
Poltergeist.
know that one.
Yeah, they should.
But it's not my favorite ghost movie, but it's up there.
What is?
My favorite ghost movie that I always will recommend for people to watch stars an actor who did perform at the Bucks County Playhouse, and he won an Academy Award for his unbelievable portrayal of Patton, and that would be no other than George C. Scott. You know what movie I'm going to mention? You know,
Oh man.
came out in 1980. It was a Canadian film, and it's called The Changeling.
Oh gosh, I forgot.
Recommended for the listeners and for you guys. Watch it. It inspires current filmmakers who make horror movies. It is really well done, and it won a bunch of awards in 1980, Canadian awards, because it was a Canadian film. And George C. Scott, as always, is just outstanding. And one of the reasons I love the film is one of the same reasons I love doing the ghost tours of New Hope. It's based on a true story.
Yep, you know what? I was maybe just a little bit too young to actually have watched that when it first came out. And as I'm finding now that I'm way older, I missed a whole bunch of really good late 70s into the early 80s like horror films because I just wasn't quite old enough. My parents were like, I think that's a little bit not, So now I'm going back and trying to like watch everything that I missed. So there we go. I got to add that one to the list for this year.
Add that one to the list. And actually, I love What Lies Beneath with Michelle Pfeiffer and Harrison
Oh
Ford.
yeah,
it reminds me a lot of The Changeling, but that one was a Hollywood. That was just the director, Robert Zemeckis, who was one of my favorite directors. That was pretty much him doing a nod to Alfred Hitchcock. Whereas The Changeling, I mean, they're very similar in a couple of ways, but The Changeling, like I said, that was based on a true story. I will watch What Lies Beneath, Halloween season. I watch it all year round. I don't know. And that's the other thing too. Our tours, we go from June to November, and we do private tours all year round. And hauntings do not just happen in October and just don't happen on Halloween. Paranormal activity is all year round. You get people who think, oh, you only do the ghost tours in October. It's like, well, we do it in October too, but hauntings are not relegated to 1 month. It's open. So.
Right. And the reason that we wanted to make sure that we got you guys in the very beginning of October is that you add days, right? I'm not saying that.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
Crazy?
It's from June to November. It's every Saturday night at 8:00, except October. It's every Friday and Saturday night. Yeah, we add in the Friday night. Matter of fact, we'll get. We don't do anything in September, but yeah, we know we'll get people coming down on the last Friday of September. Once it turns fall, people start turning their attention to ghosts.
Yes, spooky season is upon us.
Yeah.
What got you into the paranormal before you started doing ghost tours? Was there anything like that sparked your interest?
That's a really good question, and I don't know. I don't think there was anything. I don't think there was anything that happened to me personally that suddenly I was like, oh, I really like. I just always had an interest in it.
Okay.
I know that, as a kid, I know my dad, he loved stories that he called premonition stories. So when we would go out camping, he would tell these stories that he called premonition stories that would be paranormal related. My father also was very interested in things that were like about proof that there is life beyond this world. So, which is, that to me is part of the whole paranormal thing, is that paranormal activity to me provides evidence that once we leave this mortal body, that there is something after this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, it's a good question. And I don't know if there's anything that I can point to. I just always felt like I had an interest ever since I was a kid. I also know my family also comes from a line of magicians. Like, the standard stage act, pull a rabbit out of the hat kind of thing. My grandfather actually made his own tricks, and he taught my mother, and then my mother taught my oldest brother, who is exceptionally good at it. So one of the people who, as a kid, we kind of looked up to outside of the family was Harry Houdini. And ever since I was a kid, I had this fascination with Houdini as well because of the magic. But then also there's that whole paranormal side to Houdini. And I don't know how many people know, like, do you guys know his whole story, how he even got into it?
I would never say that I know his whole story.
Yeah.
But
He went around because he was trying to find a medium or somebody who can connect him to the afterworld. And he spent a good chunk of his life to doing that. And unfortunately, he was finding at that time there were a lot of people who were frauds. And so he ended up because he was a magician. So he knew tricks. He knew how to do illusions and trick people. So he was finding a lot of frauds. Well, what started him on that path? Houdini was known for doing escapes. He would go into a jail where there was no way, no prisoner ever escaped. And all of a sudden Houdini does this miraculous escape. Well, Houdini did this one escape where they take a crane, they put him in a box, and the crane goes over the Hudson River in New York City. The river is frozen over. They drop the box, the crane lets go of it. With Houdini in the box, it goes in the hole. They cut a hole in the ice. It goes through the hole and it goes into the river. Now Houdini has to escape from the box and come up through the hole. Houdini successfully gets out of the box, but the current drifted the box away from the hole and he could not find the hole to get out. And so he's submerged underwater, and you only have X amount of time before you got to get air. He heard his mother's voice, who was deceased, and he followed his mother's voice, which led him to the hole, which got him out. And when that happened, he could not understand how did he hear his mother's voice, and how was she, who was gone for years, how was she able to guide him to that hole to safety, and he was able to complete the trick. That is what started his journey on trying to find an answer to the afterlife.
I did not know that story. I did know a lot about Houdini's involvement with spiritualism and how he was always trying to, like you said, get rid of the fakes. There was so much fakery that was going on, but I did not know that story. That's really cool.
And I think what's interesting is he exposed all these fakes, but the one that he could not disprove or get answers for is the one that happened to him.
Right. So you have a story that I'm actually sort of begging you to tell the story. I'll be totally honest to the listeners. I want you to tell the story. It is about when I first heard the story, is it in the same building as the fencing academy was in, or is it a different
Yeah.
building? Okay.
No, you're 100% correct. Yes. Yeah, it's now it's the New Hope Arts Center, which they do a lot of great stuff there. It's got a beautiful auditorium, and the auditorium it's not huge, but it's big enough. They actually do live theater there. It's home to the New Hope Film Festival. You could fit in, maybe 150 people in there. So it's not tiny, but it's not, it's nice. It's perfect. Many years ago, the man that owned it was a man by the name of Bob Gerenzer. Bob was also famous in New Hope because he owned the best ice cream shop in the Philadelphia market, called Gerenzer's Exotic Ice Cream. Matter of fact, his parents started. It was there for 75 years. Bob was a historian, and he played George Washington crossing the Delaware River on the reenactment they do every year on Christmas Day. He did it 3 times. Super guy, great with history, and because he loved the American Revolution and doing that, every Christmas he did this thing called a colonial ball. So people would go, and the one requirement was you had to dress in colonial attire yourself. So the ladies had to be in the full, 18th century, colonial ball gowns, and the men would have to wear a colonial attire, and that was your requirement to go. Well, the New Hope Arts Center was around since the 1800s, and Bob would use a chandelier that had real candles in it. Well, real candles in any old building don't particularly mix. So at the end of the night, when everybody would leave, Bob would stay, and him and maybe a couple other people who helped him clean up, they would take the candles and they would extinguish them. And Bob was funny when he first told me the story. He would say, if you had a candle, like a birthday candle, you blow it out. In a few seconds, it might reignite, right? You blow out a candle. Everyone blew out a birthday candle. It may flicker and it may reignite. You have to blow it out again. Maybe after 5 minutes, the candle is safe. It's not going to reignite. They would wait 45 minutes to make sure that those candles were out and they would not reignite because it was an old building mostly made of wood. Then they would lock up the building good and tight. All the lights are out. The next day when Bob would go in, he'd walk into the auditorium and he would look up, and in the chandelier, one of the candles would be lit. He said it happened several years in a row. And he said, I'm telling you, there is no way that we left the building with anything lit. because that's what we were there for. We were fire watching to make sure that those candles were out and to make sure that they would not relight. He said, not to mention when they turned the lights out to close up the place, we would have seen the illumination.
I love that story.
It is cool, but also a little dangerous since you said that place was so old.
Yeah. Well, Bob would tell you, first of all, Bob was funny. He would say to me, Scott, I'm going to have to tell you, I really don't believe in any of this. I don't have an answer for it, but I don't believe, in it. And then he proceeds and says, so the other day I was working in the auditorium and I had a ladder and a hammer, and I put the hammer down on the ladder and I turned around, did something. And when I went back to the ladder, my hammer was gone. He actually goes to the hardware store, buys a brand new hammer, goes back. As soon as he walks in, the hammer is back on the ladder. And then one day he's in the basement working on some things. He hears loud noises. He's the only one in the building. He's hearing loud noises in the auditorium, like somebody's now in the auditorium knocking around chairs and stuff. He drops everything, runs as fast as he can. And as soon as he goes in the auditorium, all the sound stops. Nobody's there. And yet he will tell you, I don't believe in this. It's like, well, Bob, what do you think happened? He goes, I don't know. I don't know either, Bob, but I got a pretty good idea. But then he would tell you, he said, whatever's going on in that building, he thought it was evil because it was, or I would look at it more mischievous because things would appear and disappear. One time he's on the ladder, somebody grabbed his leg and tried to yank him down, so fun stuff like that.
Before we started recording, I mentioned I'd gotten to listen to him one time. He reminded me of someone who's very Fortean in nature because he's like, I'm just sort of taking in all the information. I don't know if I believe it or not, but here's what happened. So
Right.
Very scientific. And I love that story though, because that was the one where he even was like, the only thing I can say it must have been paranormal because I got nothing else.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100% correct.
And especially since it wasn't, I know at least on the one occasion that I heard him speak about it, it wasn't just him that witnessed it. It was a whole bunch of other workers who had witnessed this on several occasions because they would go in the day after to clean up from the party. And this would be like the next morning, him and several other people would be the very first people to re-enter the building. He's got the keys. Nobody else is getting in there. And then you have to ask yourself, like, even if someone got in, why would they light like one candle?
Yeah. Imagine that police report. We got a report on a guy. He's breaking into buildings and lighting a candle and then leaving. Like, wow, I'm trying to get that guy.
He's top of the line.
Yeah.
He goes down first.
Yeah.
I do like that the story it was like always after the ball, because we've talked about like how when you have an event where everyone's dressing up in period, it like stimulates the ghost activity or paranormal activity at that place, especially if you're in the period that like a lot of the history and the ghosts are potentially from, because it's like you're making them feel more at home. And paranormal investigators that go in and they're saying new slang and stuff, like how's a ghost gonna respond to that? Like they don't know what you're talking about if it is an intelligent spirit. Right. But you're making them feel more comfortable, and that might be like one of the reasons why there's a little bit of like a physical activity that happens and there's a lasting mark with lighting a candle, because that's not like a common paranormal trope.
And that is something that we're gonna get into at some point in the near future. Is that there is an archaeologist I've mentioned before. His last name's Sable, and he does that kind of work. Now that he's not a professor, he has an interesting story where he was like, "Well, I can't really get into this ghost investigation stuff until after I'm done my tenure because they might have kicked me out." But he does that. He gets dressed up, or he has his team of other scientists get dressed up in the period clothing and read letters. He did a lot of work in Gettysburg, for example, reading letters that should have been sent to majors or lieutenants and they never got them, kind of thing. So, and he's gotten some really interesting EVPs from that work. So it you know what? And it didn't occur to me that, yeah, these things were happening right after the big Christmas ball where everyone's making it look like it's colonial era. That's actually kind of interesting.
I'm glad I picked up on that, Kiki. You're welcome.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's a good observation. Can I tell you one of my favorite paranormal stories? It has nothing to do with New Hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with Fort Mifflin?
Oh my God, that's another synchronicity. Yeah. Anyway, go right ahead. Yes.
So Fort Mifflin, most people don't even know it exists. They don't even know what it is. It sits right at the base of one of the runways for Philadelphia International Airport. When you're at Fort Mifflin, when planes are landing, it is so close to the landing that you actually can see the people in the window and you can wave to them. But Fort
Yep.
Mifflin was extraordinarily important. It is the fort that saved America when the British were taking over Philadelphia during the Philadelphia campaign right after the Battle of Germantown in 1777, and they held it through 1778. But Fort Mifflin and Fort Mercer right across the river, they held off the British fleet long enough that the Continental Congress was able to escape to York. Well, Fort Mifflin during the Civil War was a prison, and they had mostly Confederate soldiers that were there. And a friend of mine who does paranormal investigation went with my brother and my first cousin, and unfortunately I was working that night and I couldn't make it to go with them, and I'm so sorry I couldn't go. But they went down there, they had their EVP, it was at night. My first cousin is a musician, and for some reason he brought a harmonica with him. So they're in one of the cells where Confederate soldiers were held, and my cousin pulls out his harmonica and he plays Shenandoah River, which is a river down in Virginia, and it's a song about that. Very popular in the South. It's a great song. So he plays it on his harmonica. When he gets done, nobody thinks of it until they go to the EVP. They play the EVP. They hear my cousin play Shenandoah River. At the end, as soon as he finishes, you hear a whisper go, "Thank you."
Wow.
Oh man, I love that. That is fantastic. Yeah, I truly think that we need to be focusing on that type of interaction when it comes to, the quote ghost hunting. I like your choice of ghost chasing because I do feel like most of the time we're not actually hunting them. We're not, well, I personally don't want to like murder ghosts, but
Yeah. Well, they called Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries. She was called investigator. I think I like that one because you're investigating.
Yes.
You're looking into it. Chaser, hunter. I agree. Hunter it's too ominous. Like, we're not hunting these people. We're trying to understand them. We're trying to understand, and we also want to get any tips when we're on that side. Like, what do we do? So.
Okay, we're going to take a short break for our featured music today, which comes from Pageant Girls out of New York, New York. Their album is called First. This came out of November of last year. It is available on Bandcamp, and the song that we are going to play is called Fortune Teller. When we get back, we are going to continue our discussion with Scott, and he's going to let you know how to get to the New Hope Ghost Tours.
You Google it.
Shut up, JC.
You use Google Maps. That's how you get there.
That does work. I mean,
Yeah, it does work. Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
While he was talking, I did pull up Google Maps and was looking at the street names. So.
There you go. You can also visit. We're on social media, MySpace. Thank you very much for laughing, because yes, that is a joke.
That is a word I have not heard in a while.
Yeah, I know, right?
Welcome back, everybody.
How does one get to New Hope? For those who are local, Google it.
Yeah, you could always do that. Yeah. Well, it's funny you say local, but I tell you what, we get guests from all over. We've had guests come from the West Coast, because New Hope is a great vacation spot. As a matter of fact, New Hope is one of the hot destination spots for all of Bucks County. And it actually does better than some of the other things we have in Bucks County. So a lot of people come to visit New Hope, especially people from New York. It's only a couple hours from New York. People like to come there for the weekend. So it's nice because we get people from all over, because we have a lot of great bed and breakfasts there. Like I mentioned, the Wedgwood Inn and the Appleby, and there's other hotels and stuff that you can stay at and just spend the weekend and then have part of your plans come visit us at the ghost tours. The nice thing about New Hope is if you can get to the bed and breakfast, you can get to the tours. It's not a big town. It's actually not even a town. It's actually classified as a village. So we meet every Saturday night at 8 o'clock from the first Saturday in June to the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And we're right there at the corner of Main and Ferry Street, right next to the Perry Mansion, or the Benjamin Perry Mansion, same thing. And that's where we meet. It's very easy to get to. And like you said, you can go to you can Google it, or you can go to our website, which is theghosttoursofnewhope.com. You can find us on Facebook, our Facebook page. We have a lot of interesting photos and videos. One of my favorite paranormal pictures was taken on a tour that I was doing on the Ferry Street route. And that's on our Facebook page as well. So you can get all that information there as well.
And the tours are about an hour long?
Yep, they are an hour long. And there's two routes to the ghost tours of New Hope. We have Mechanic Street and Ferry Street, two separate set of stories, both 1 hour. And it's only $10 per person for these tours. We have not raised the prices in years. It's a great deal. 1 hour tour. You also could do private tours. Private tours are all year round, and they are $12 per person, but you are required to have at least 8 people. And if you don't have 8 people, you are still required to pay for 8 people. That itself, I think it's a great deal. As long as a tour guide's available, we'll do it. We did one this past year in February, and it was good weather. A few years ago, I did one in February. It was actually snowing. It was pretty cool. One of the funniest things I mentioned about doing private tours, I said to somebody, yeah, do a Christmas tour. It'd be a lot of fun. And this woman says to me, Christmas tour? Why would anybody want to hear a ghost story at Christmas? And I looked at her and I said, I don't know. Ask Charles Dickens.
Right. Thank
Telling
you.
ghost stories used to be like a Christmas tradition. Like,
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Now it's in one of the Christmas carols. It said, we'll sing, scary ghost stories or whatever.
Yep.
It's actually in there. But, one of the greatest ghost stories ever told is A Christmas Carol. Hello, lady.
yeah.
So I don't know.
That, and there's never a day I'm like, who doesn't want to talk about ghosts today?
I'm with you. I'm so with you on that.
It just reminds me that I need to get a horse skull to make that marriage.
Oh yes, we need a horse skull. Side project. Okay, so hour-long tours, walking tour, as someone
Yes.
who has also walked all over the place for hours and hours and hours in New Hope. Wear sensible shoes, people, because I'm trying to imagine the roadways, but there's a couple that go uphill a little bit, right? I mean, at least. No, see, I'm not sure how the tours go. So are you going uphill a little bit?
If you do the
Up
Ferry
one
Street
side?
road, Ferry Street has an incline because Ferry Street goes up a hill. It's a gradual up, and so that one it's not too bad because we don't walk it straight. We stop at the locations, and I think it's also
True.
important to note that we don't go in the buildings. We used
Yes.
to when we first started. She would go in, when she being Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries, she would take the groups in the building, but a couple of things happened while we stopped. One was for insurance reasons. It was, we just couldn't do it. But the other thing is we get, especially in October, we get huge crowds. We're going to get hundreds of people out here on the weekends. You can't take in large crowds in these buildings. It's just not possible. So everything is outside. So anyway, back to your original question. Yeah, so Ferry Street has an incline, but it's not too bad because we do stop along the way. And then the other route, which is the Mechanic Street route, we do walk along the canal. Both of them we do ask, bring a flashlight. You don't have to. The guides have lanterns and flashlights. But you do walk along a dark canal. It is a towpath on a canal, so you want to, just be aware of that. We do recommend comfortable shoes. That is always our recommendation. But you're not going miles and miles and miles. The village isn't that big. It's only a few blocks.
I think for me it would be like you just don't want to wear your stilettos.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Ladies, leave the stilettos at home. Put on your
Yes.
walking boots. You'll be fine.
Exactly.
I was thinking about this question too because I've got a 6-year-old, but I think a tour like this is perfectly fine as long as your child's not going to act up. like on the tour?
Yeah, we can't tell you because we don't know your child.
Right.
I know for our kids, because they kind of grew up with this, they were fine at a young age, but that's the way our kids were. But I did a tour, I don't know, a few weeks back, and they brought in a little girl, and she was probably like 8 years old. She had a big problem with it, but that's because that child was very sensitive to it, and she struggled with it. But we had other kids on the tour who were probably younger than that, and they had no problem with it. So we don't restrict children on the tour. It's a parental decision because you know your child better than we do. But I will say this, we tell the stories, they are what they are. We're telling you true stories. Nobody puts on a fake spooky voice and nobody was wearing costumes. No one is trying to scare you. But some people get freaked out because we're telling you authentic stories of paranormal events. And so parents have to know that up front, and we don't sugarcoat it. And so if you bring a child, they're more than welcome, but you know your child better than anybody. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I think it's kind of important too.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Man, awesome stories. Loved every minute of it. I'm so excited that I finally got to talk a little bit about New Hope.
Yeah, I'm sure Scott doesn't get to do that often either. So it was probably really refreshing for him.
Yeah. I love it. I love doing the stories. I love talking about it, and so it's great for me. Thank you for having me here. I've really enjoyed it, and I can talk about ghost stories all day, all the time. So I've really enjoyed it. And again, thank you for inviting me. I do want to end with a quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes from Adi-Kent Thomas Jeffries, one of the original ghost chasers. And the quote goes like this: "There are more ghosts per square mile in New Hope, Pennsylvania than in anywhere else in the world that I have investigated."
All right, JC, we're going to New Hope. Get ready.
Yeah, you got to come. You got to
We
come.
have so many places we gotta go, and I'm
Yeah.
excited for all of it.
Yeah.
I want to see a ghost again.
Stay spooky and don't die. But if you do, contact us.
And if you contact me, it will be a grave mistake.